Welcome to the Mindful Leadership Podcast. How do we navigate through all the noise, distractions, and pressures to make thoughtful, conscious decisions that are better for us, our people, our customers, and our organization? How do we know if we're busy and effective or just too busy to be effective? In this podcast, we talk to leaders who share their stories about challenging existing paradigms and doing different things differently. I'm your host, Shahana Banerjee, founder and CEO of Just Human, Not Resources, on a mission to humanize the future of work. In this episode, we dive into a mega dose of inspiration with Amy Turk, Director of Strategy and Innovation, HIPS, at DePuy Synthes in Johnson & Johnson, a woman on a mission to improve patient outcomes by championing inclusivity in orthopedics and busting many biases and stereotypes along the way. Amy, it's so good to have you on our podcast. I'm excited.
So am I.
People, Amy is a force of nature. So fasten your seatbelts. Here we go. So Amy, your story is so inspiring. Your resilience, your never say die attitude, and so much more. Tell us a little bit about your journey and the experiences, the people and influences that have shaped you into who you are today.
I was born in South Korea and I was adopted in the early 80s. And so I grew up in the Midwest, actually in Kansas. There was not cultural training with adoptions. So my parents, who are white, Christian, conservative Midwesterners, they didn't really have to learn about Korean culture, didn't really have to learn about where I grew up or where I came from. It was basically when I landed in Kansas, that's when kind of the rest of my life began. As you can imagine, I was a minority, and I was a minority in school, in the community, and I was a minority at home. If you think about minority families kind of living in the Midwest, Asian kids get a bit of relief when they go home to their Asian families. They're not, different all the time. But kind of as an Asian kid in an adopted family, I never really got that relief. And I really didn't have anybody to talk to or identify some of the struggles that I went through. So as I grew up, I always stood out in the classroom. I always stood out in the community. I was never like Amy. I was always that Asian girl. And so I was like, well, I'll do something with this. I'll do something with it. I stand out already. So it kind of drove me to perform well. It drove me to be a little competitive, and it also drove me to be an achiever and sometimes an overachiever. So I guess you could say I took some of the hurdles and I turned them into something that I could really stand on. And so kind of moving on from there, I went to school in Indiana. And then when I graduated, I ended up in Warsaw, Indiana. It is the orthopedic capital of the world. So I started at DePuy Synthes 18 years ago, and I've been there ever since. About 16 years in, I moved from Warsaw into South Florida, and that's where I am today. And I've had quite a journey in my career. I started as a contractor. I started as someone who was learning how to use a fax machine and run errands and do a lot of administrative duties. And I spent a lot of time doing those transactional roles. And that's where I really learned the organization and the people. I really learned the business within marketing when I moved into a global marketing role and I got my MBA. I think that just really signaled to leadership that I was ready to take on more, and I was given opportunities, and I was given sponsorship and allyship, and kind of since then it's really been rolling. I'm really happy where I am today.
So Amy, you talked a little bit about your growing up years, right? And how difficult it is to understand yourself, what's going on, but also to explain what's happening to you in these situations. If you think about our world today, a lot of our peers who don't have these experiences necessarily like us struggle to understand what it is that we go through. So, could you talk a little bit about what you went through and why your parents found it so difficult to actually relate or understand? Or what was their reaction to what you were facing in terms of these challenges?
When I was going through it, and especially as a kid, I did not know how to describe it. And I still struggle to describe it today. The word microaggression helps describe what takes place. It's the comments where people say something about your physical appearance first before addressing like who you are. They're always identifying me as the Asian girl versus Amy or who I am or another characteristic about my personality or what I do. And for my parents, I don't think they knew how to address it or um, I don't think they understood how it made me feel because a lot of this stuff is it's the subtle stuff that hurts. It's not the overt stuff. The
Hmm.
overt comments, the nasty looks, like those are easy to address.
Hmm.
Those are easy to address. If you have enough courage to address it, those are easy to address. It's the subtle comments. And especially as a kid, it's just those comments that are made that make you feel different than everybody else.
Hmm.
And it just, when you're worried that you don't fit in and then you have a comment that reinforces you don't belong or you don't fit in, um, that's where I really struggled as a kid to figure out my identity, who I wanted to be and how I wanted to show up.
How did you feel going through some of these experiences?
I think it's when you're constantly reminded that you're different
Mm-hmm.
instead of constantly reminded that you belong or you fit in or that you're included. And those reminders, they can be verbal, they can be non-verbal, they can be subtle, they can be spoken in just somebody misunderstands you or comes with their own assumptions about you.
Mm.
But it is that constant reminder that you don't belong or fit in or
You're not
aren't
one
what,
of us. Yeah.
yeah, and aren't what people expect of you.
Mm. One of the things you talked about in terms of your career was the role that allyship and sponsorship played in, helping you move forward in your career. So could you talk about perhaps an example or a story? Often we talk about allyship, but don't quite know what it looks like. Talk to us about an experience that you perhaps had with an ally or a sponsor who truly helped you.
Well, I think you find out who your allies are when you're going through something really difficult.
Mm.
Yes, I would say the past 7 years, especially in my career, they've been really great, and I've had a lot of momentum and a lot of support, but I've had some bumps in the road. I had a really difficult situation where I was being criticized for my tone, how I showed up at meetings, and the criticism came from a couple of women. And this had happened after I had probably the best year in my career as far as work. Like I felt like things were moving forward. The work, the actual work that I had my hands in doing, it was meaningful. It was significant. Things were happening. I was executing. I felt really good about my work. And at the end of the year, I had a lot of criticism. And it wasn't about my work. It was about me and my tone and how I said things. And I didn't know how to take it. I didn't know if I should apologize. I didn't know what I had done wrong, but it was heavy. It was
Mm.
really, really heavy and it hurt.
Mm.
I was in a place where the criticisms, I wasn't sure if I wanted to keep working there. I worked so hard, but I feel so bad at the end of the year.
Right.
It was really difficult to hear and it was very hurtful. So when I kind of brought it up, I would say like the male leaders, they didn't know what to do with it. And I don't think they really wanted to touch it because, you know, it was dynamics. It was hard for them to measure and identify. And I don't think they really knew how to fix it. But I did have one male ally that really stood up for me. He took the burden from me. He said, listen, I hear what you're saying. I know this is hurtful, and these things are being said to hurt you. I will take this on. I will fix it. You can get back to work.
Hmm.
But I think what he really did for me was just listen and validate and um, tell me that I wasn't crazy. You know, like sometimes you just need that. And I don't really know what he did, but it stopped. It stopped, and it didn't fall back on me,
Hmm.
and there wasn't retaliation, and I was able to get back to work. So I felt that. I felt seen, heard, valued, and that really stuck with me, and it sticks with me now.
Hmm.
If I didn't have that, I would have probably just quit.
Hmm. It's interesting because, we often think of allyship as this big thing, you've got to go and move mountains. And it's actually not. It's the small things, right? It's about just caring enough to have that conversation and to go and do something about it. Since then, you've blossomed. So, talk a little bit more about what that journey has been like.
Yeah, it did kind of just free me. I'm going to show up to work and be myself. I'm not sure what's going to happen. People might not like it, but I'm going to be myself. And being myself means to be authentic, to be honest, to say yes, to say no, to have healthy boundaries at work,
Mm,
to stand up for people, to stand up for myself, to be vocal in a meeting where I don't agree with the direction that we're headed and to be vocal about it. And I'd say so far, so good. I feel really good about showing up as myself. I feel like
mm,
the person I am at home is the same person that shows up at work, maybe tweaked a little bit. but but yes, for the most part, I feel consistent. I
mm,
feel consistent. And so I think being able to show up as myself and lead a team that way as well, to encourage people to be themselves when they're at work and to be vocal and to share their thoughts, to share their opinions, and to really drive a culture of true inclusion.
mm. And that's really interesting also because, in some ways, that authentic leadership that you dialed into helped you discover your purpose and do a lot more of what you love. And, Women of Orthopedics is some truly groundbreaking pioneering work that you are leading. So, talk a little bit more about what is Women of Orthopedics and why is it important?
I am surprised about how much it has grown and taken off. That was never the goal. It was never the goal. So really, it was only 18 months ago. I was on a call with a subcommittee called the Women in Arthroplasty. It's a subcommittee of the American Association of Hip and Knee Surgeons. 40 to 50 ladies on the call. And I was like, well, this is strange. I only have one of these women in my phone. I'm like, how do I just have one of these women in my contacts when I have a whole list of male surgeons that I work with? My role was to present DePuy Synthes in our portfolio for hips and knees. And we
Mhm.
did that. And then I just kind of sat back and I was like, what could we do for you? What could we do for female surgeons? And all of these ideas and the feedback just started pouring out from these surgeons. And I was like, all of these things are easy to do. You want more representation, or you want more opportunities for consulting, whether that's education, voice of customer, focus groups, design. Um, you would like kind of some visibility to our strategy, to our portfolio. You would like our reps, our corporate employees, just treat you the same way we treat other surgeons. That's
Mhm.
really easy to do. So I guess I just started doing it. Like I had a couple follow-up calls with a couple surgeons, and in my mind I was like, I need to do what I do with other surgeons. Like with male surgeons, I need to do the same thing with female surgeons, which is learn about them, learn about their practice, learn about what they like and dislike about their products, and listen to them. And so I just started doing that kind of like one at a time. It's important to me to focus on women in orthopedics to make sure they feel heard and
Mm.
seen and valued. It's important that they have equal opportunities as male surgeons, and it's important for younger surgeons to see an example of women maybe in a dual career household, raising kids and having a very successful career.
Mhm.
Um, and I don't think that they've had that representation in the past. There have been, I am not the pioneer. There have been many other female surgeons trailblazing and leading efforts. And it's just easier now because they've already blazed the trail.
Medical devices itself and orthopedics, certainly within medical devices, is a notoriously skewed industry from a diversity standpoint. And so the work that you're doing for Women of Orthopedics, there is a larger purpose to it.
There's 25,000 orthopedic surgeons in the United States,
Mhm.
and only 6 to 8% are women.
Wow.
Yeah, I think it was 6 a couple years ago, so I'm going to give it a couple more percentage points now.
Benefit of doubt.
It is low. It's really, really low.
Really low.
Yeah.
And why is that the case, Amy?
Yes, you hear that orthopedics is physically demanding, especially arthroplasty.
Mm-hmm.
But I think some of the female surgeons now will say we need to combat those misconceptions. Like women can do this, especially with the technology that we have, especially as they're trying to improve design to make it more universal. I did hear recently that 25% of first-year orthopedic resident applicants are female.
Wow, that's progress.
25% right now. Not all of those will go into arthroplasty, into joints surgery. That has increased so much over the past couple years. And I think it's because there's better representation from like mid-career female orthopedic surgeons.
Hmm.
And then if you look at color, um, less than 2% of orthopedic surgeons in the US are Black.
Wow.
Less than 2%. And if you look in arthroplasty, there are only 7 Black female arthroplasty surgeons in the US, not even double digits.
Wow.
7. And you can imagine like women and women of color, what they have told me is that, you know, it's every week, sometimes every day, their patients are questioning if they're the surgeon. Are you really going to do my surgery? Are you really the person to do it? Or that
Wow.
the assumption is that they are staff
Hmm.
or administrative
Mm-hmm.
or in some kind of support role, but they're never first assumed to be the surgeon.
Hmm. That's terrible. In 2022, no less.
In 2022, yeah.
Yeah. I've worked in medical devices as well. And I think one of the challenges the industry faces is who is really your customer? Because often what happens for healthcare is that your customers end up being your surgeons, your doctors. The end patient is diverse, right? You have half men, half women, I would think, who are getting their knees or hips or whatever operated on, and as many people of color as is represented in the population. And so it's interesting that the healthcare base of people who serve this population is so homogeneous when the patient population is so diverse. Yeah.
And yeah, if you think of all the people needing hip and knee replacements, I mean, they're in a lot of pain. They see hip and knee replacement as very invasive. They're scared. They're
Mm-hmm.
very scared. They don't know what they don't know. So they must trust their surgeon and they must have kind of that immediate rapport to start to feel comfortable with their surgery. And so, yeah, it's about increasing representation, increasing inclusivity in orthopedics,
Mm.
and increasing inclusion between or among the orthopedic community and industry.
Right.
So just like we want to help patients see surgeons that look like them and to,
Mhm.
help build that immediate rapport, we also want surgeons to see industry look like them so we can all partner together and all better serve the patient community.
Right.
That is really the end goal.
Right. Beautifully said, Amy. Let me ask you this as a follow-up, right? Your work for the Women of Orthopedics is certainly really close to your heart. Why is it so important for you to really drive that agenda and champion it so well?
It's important to me because standing up for people is important to me. And I think it goes back to, how I grew up. I didn't really have people standing up for me. I
Mm,
didn't really have people validating how I felt.
mm,
I didn't have that. And, you know, when I have received that, whether it was that example that I described in work, or other times, it's really meaningful to me. It's really meaningful. And so I'm very purposeful with how I live and looking for opportunities to stand up for people. I'm very purposeful in how I parent my daughters.
Thank you for sharing that. We do a lot of work on allyship. And one of the realizations we've had is that one of the biggest problems that leaders face is converting positive intent into action. In that case, you were surrounded by some of the finest leaders who are good human beings, who care about their people, inclusive leaders, right? And really good leaders. And yet they miss the obvious. And it happens to the best of us, I think. We get sometimes so mired by the constraints of our present, right? That we're not able, we almost get stuck and we're not able to figure out how to connect that positive intent into action. And a lot of people, I think, don't have the tools or the education to actually do it. What you're doing with the Women of Orthopedics is really sort of moving that needle by asking those questions, by understanding almost what is it that is important for this community that is different from the rest of the surgeon community, and then what's possible, right? And so that's really, I think, commendable, the focus that you have on a community that perhaps has been underserved previously. What's been the response to the Women of Orthopedics initiative?
The goal for Women of Ortho was never for it to be this big thing with all of this attention and an award. And I felt really funny about accepting that award. This was the Women in Arthroplasty Empowerment Award. I was grateful, but I also felt really funny about it because it's not just me, it's everyone. And
Mm-hmm.
I'll explain how Women of Ortho really started. In DePuy Synthes, there was an initiative to elevate female leadership and elevate their story.
Hmm.
So a woman could be nominated by a colleague and a coworker to say, like, your story is really inspiring. Please fill out these 4 questions, and we're going to put your picture and the
Okay.
answers to your 4 questions on the homepage so
Mm-hmm.
people can just learn a little more about you, humanizing
Mm-hmm.
their role in leadership.
Right.
And it could be any woman at any kind of level, but if they inspired you or motivated you or helped you feel better in your career, they were nominated. So there was that's how it started, this Women of Ortho initiative.
Hmm.
And I saw what was going on. I was like, this is really great. Let's extend this to our female surgeon
Mm-hmm.
customers. And so it was basically kind of taking that idea of elevating each other, giving each other advocacy, and extending it to our surgeon customers.
Mm-hmm.
And then it grew from there, and we kind of organized it into 4 main pillars. With Women of Ortho, we're delivering on what they want, and it's helping them, and it's empowering them, and they're becoming better business women in their practice, or they're able to navigate situations where they feel more confident, or it's simply they have a stronger community with
Right.
female surgeons.
Right.
I mean, that in itself can be of so much value. And when they see that, they're like, let's do this. Like the ideas keep rolling
Yeah.
and it keeps expanding.
So, Amy, it seems like your Women of Orthopedics is going through a complete snowball effect, right? Growing like crazy and it's taking a life on of its own. So, talk more about how that came to be.
It absolutely is. With every event or every kind of step that we take with Women of Ortho, it always exceeds our expectations. And I'll give you an example. So at Academy, at the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons, their annual meeting, we hosted the panel interview.
Right.
And we kind of lined it up. We had a surgeon talk about or marketing yourself to patients and building your brand. We had a surgeon talk about the truth about imposter syndrome. And then we had a DePuy Synthes leader talk about female empowerment and our DePuy Synthes commitment to women of orthopedics. And we anticipated that maybe 80 people would show up. We weren't
Right.
sure, but we had close to 400.
Oh
And
my God.
yes, and we had surgeons, we had female surgeons say, I just never go to the exhibit booth, but I came for this event because I was curious and I wanted to hear what you had to say and what these female surgeons had to say. And it was very, very powerful, especially the talk about imposter syndrome. She had never really shared her story on a big stage, and it
Mm,
was vulnerable and it was moving. And she shared how she has not felt included when it comes to industry and how some of that was her maybe internal feelings, but it also has to do with the environment that people create around other people.
mm,
So, what can we do? What can we do as industry or partners to these surgeons to combat those feelings of imposter syndrome? And it was
mm.
very eye opening. It was very eye opening. And so, kind of, we moved forward from there, and we hosted another event at AUKUS, which is the American Association of Hip and Knee Surgeons. We just did that in November. And I had a colleague sit next to Lisa Leslie on a plane. She basically started the WMBA and shared what we were doing in Women of Orthopedics. And she immediately was interested. And from there, we were able to have her come and speak at this annual meeting.
Wow.
And it was also very powerful. She really brought kind of the positivity to being diverse,
Mm,
standing up for yourself and creating change,
mm.
just like she created change in professional basketball.
Right.
So now we're kind of like, well, what's next? Because it's got to be bigger and better than what we've had before. But it is exciting. We have a lot of momentum. I'm most excited about how female surgeons really do feel validated and
Mm-hmm.
empowered. If DePuy Synthes tried to build an instrument or an implant by ourselves for a surgeon, it wouldn't fit the need. So we need surgeons to bring their expertise and their feedback to build the right product. And I see Women of Ortho in the same way. We can't do it on our own. Industry, we can't do it on our own. We have to have surgeons tell us what they need and give us ideas about how we can partner. And then together we can do it in a better way.
There were all of these women surgeons, women in the orthopedic industry, but there wasn't exactly a space for them to come and be themselves and be able to relate to one another. And like you said, lift each other up. And so this Women of Orthopedics is really providing a much needed space in our minds to be able to do that in an authentic way.
You're right about that. You're right about that. And sometimes I think it is powerful just because it gives opportunity for women to come together. Within arthroplasty, women in arthroplasty, that subcommittee, they're doing a lot of work to be consistent about bringing women in arthroplasty together on a regular basis.
Yeah.
and have conversations and build programs to elevate each other.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. A program like this takes significant leadership resolve, right? And you're obviously doing this because you're passionate about it. What's the kind of support and, leadership commitment and help you're getting along the way on this journey?
I do have a lot of support from leadership, especially executive leadership. I have support. There's financial support for these programs. I have emotional support where some of the female leaders are like, "Are you okay? I know this is a lot. Can I help you in any way? Can I hug you?" I know that's really weird, but sometimes I just need a hug. I think what I have seen that has been the most helpful is sponsorship from male leadership.
Yeah.
And that sponsorship is really, it's just supporting me nonstop. It's supporting the program. It's not criticizing the program. It's only asking, like, what can I do to help? Some of our male leadership, they have really stepped in to drive programs called Men as Allies and talk about their story, talk about their journey in supporting women. Maybe they have daughters that are interested in going to business or medicine or just in supporting women so that their daughters have a pathway forward in their career, or they've shared stories where they've advocated and supported women in sales or in R&D or the rest of the business, and they've seen those women flourish. So there's a lot of great stories from our male leaders that have really supported this program. People are getting out of the way. They're not telling me how to do it. They're not really telling any of us how to do it. They're telling us, like, be yourself, show up with good intent, and make it happen. I think that's the beauty of all of this, truly bringing people to the table, asking their opinion, asking what they think, making sure that the environment is safe,
Right.
admitting mistakes as a leader,
Mm-hmm.
and then talking about how they navigated through those mistakes. That's actually been really powerful through this whole Women of Ortho program. We've had leaders admit mistakes, admit that they have stereotypes, but also talk through how they've overcome some of those thoughts that have held them back from bringing everybody together.
Right. That's really great. Let me ask you some rapid fire questions. Okay. We're looking for quick responses to some of these questions. So, the first one, what is one piece of advice that has really helped you in your life and career? And what's one piece of advice that you'd like to share with our listeners today?
Well, I did receive some great advice a few years ago in managing my career. And there's kind of three things that happen in your career. So there's your performance, which you have complete control over. You have your reputation, which you somewhat have control over, but some of that is out of your control.
Right.
And you have exposure, and exposure is out of your control. And that's where you need sponsorship, advocacy, allyship. And that's really important. So all those three things, they kind of drive the direction of your career, and you need all of those three things, which also means you need help.
Right. And you've got to ask for help as well.
And you do have to ask for help.
Mm-hmm.
So my advice, be yourself, to be who you are at home and who you are at work. Bring your values to work. Bring your values and your purpose, who you are, who you want to be, like bring all of those things to work and let your colleagues see who you actually are.
Beautifully said. Next one. What's your favorite superhero movie?
Oh, probably Wonder Woman. Just because I'm an intense person and I don't mind a little bit of like female superheroes kicking butt. So I like the fight scenes.
Absolutely. If you were a superhero, Amy, what would be your superpower?
This may not be much of a superpower, but I I would want wisdom. To me, it is a superpower to make a decision now that will be the right decision in the future.
Yeah,
I know this is not exciting. That is not an exciting superpower, but it
that is
is,
very exciting. The ability to discern
yes.
fact from fiction and actually base a decision on facts that help you out in the future is absolutely a superpower that anyone would love to have and seems so apt for our times today.
I mean, sometimes I feel like I'm just doing the best that I can and hoping that it works out in the future. It would just be great to be able to make a decision and know that it'll work out in the future.
We're all winging it a little bit. We can go on forever. And this has been so much fun.